Here in the Netherlands, the flower bulbs bloom in spring, a time when you can land among a sea of colours. But all through the year, there's the water in the mills, turning and grinding and pumping. The Netherlands also has its idyllic spots, castles, churches and other landmarks in villages, towns and cities that are of great historical significance. The capital is Amsterdam, with its stately facades and its bridges and canals. And of course, the celebrated Rijksmuseum or State Museum, where the Night Watch by Rembrandt van Rijn is a much visited attraction. Trade and fishing have always played a prominent role in this small country, especially in days of old when the world's oceans were sailed by the mighty ships of the Dutch East India Company. Nothing's at stake here, but on the world stage, the Dutch ice skaters play a leading part. The Hague, the government residence and home to the royal family, has its art markets. For that matter, artistic expressions of every kind can be seen in all imaginable as well as unimaginable places. Wherever Vincent van Gogh stayed for shorter or longer periods, his memory is kept alive. Like here in his birthplace, Zundert, where a statue by the Russian-French sculptor Zadkine symbolizes the solidarity that existed between Vincent van Gogh and his brother Theo. There's also a cultural center in Zundert bearing Van Gogh's name, where his life is rendered in images. The struggle the Netherlands had to wage against the water was fought with success. The water was brought under control in all sorts of ways. Old ships as pleasure boats. New mills for wind energy, from which, as of old, the sailing ships profit as well. In Drenthe, one of the 12 Dutch provinces, Vincent van Gogh stayed for a few months. Since that time, the last part of the 19th century, only little has changed here. It was the area of the hard-working peat cutters, whom he painted extensively while he was here. Vincent stayed at a lodging house here in the village of New Amsterdam. It seems as if time stood still here. The National Blacksmith's Workshop. Would he still shoe horses? It looks as if life here is still lived as it was in the 19th century. This is one of the many churches Vincent painted near the village of Nuenen, where he would paint his most famous work. The parsonage of the pastor of Nuenen has not changed since 1880, when Vincent's parents, his father was the pastor, lived here. In and around Nuenen, walking tours and bicycle routes have been mapped out, which lead visitors along the spots where Van Gogh once put down his easel. For example, past the impressive old watermills at Kol and Nederwetten. Next to the town hall now stands the Van Gogh Documentation Center. Here the visitor gets an impression of social life at the time of Van Gogh, and of course a series of reproductions of the works he made in Nuenen. There are also a number of artifacts and objects on display, such as a loom, which inspired Van Gogh in his choice of subjects and studies. One of these is a reproduction of one of the versions of his famous potato eaters. His masterpiece, many say, and if it is, it's the highlight of his Dutch period, often dark and on the gloomy side. The largest collections of paintings and drawings by Van Gogh are found at the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam and at the Kröller-Müller Museum in Otterlo. The Borinage is a French-speaking region in the southern province of Hainaut, Henegouwen in Flemish, close to the French border. Partly an agricultural area that used to be controlled by rich lords residing in castles who had the farmers work for them. On the other hand, it used to be a mining district, where coal was extracted by miners in deep pits under the most appalling conditions. Villages lie amongst the now overgrown mountains of cinders and other unusable mining waste. The most important city in the Borinage is Mons, Bergen in Flemish, the capital and the center of the industrial basin of the Borinage. In Mons, there's the Museum of the Fine Arts, which possesses one of the last drawings Van Gogh made in the Borinage as a professional artist. The mines in the Borinage area have been declared an industrial heritage. They were shut down in the middle of the 20th century. Ornu is home to the remains of a remarkable mining project, Le Grand Ornu. It's a kind of traditional urban and industrial complex for mining coal. Henri de Gorge, whose statue adorns the courtyard, initiated building the immense complex. In addition to the mine itself, there were workshops, stables and offices. Round the complex were a good 450 laborers' cottages and a chateau where the owners lived. At the time, the complex was seen as an unprecedented achievement of the Industrial Revolution in Europe. The complex is now a museum, which organizes cultural events and serves as a tourist attraction and center for innovative technology and science. One of the biggest problems the mining industry had to deal with was getting the coal to its markets. The distances were great and the costs high. So a canal had to be dug to ship the coal. Easier said than done, because the river dropped no less than 75 meters. Under the direction of a British engineer, a solution was found. 4 large sluice complexes were built. At each sluice, the ships were hoisted up and down in large lock lifts, a feat of great technical ingenuity, which applied the law of communicating vessels. Next to the old canal, a new canal has now been dug, with a new sluice complex bridging the 75-metre drop in one go. That saves a lot of time, of course, making transport by ship attractive again. And the new sluice is at least as worth seeing as the old 4. When the 4 old block lifts have been restored, they'll be placed on the World Heritage List. On the former site of the Bois de Luc coal mine in Hudin-Emery, there is now the Musée de la Mine, where we're made privy to the daily life of the mine workers in all its appalling misery. The tower of the elevator shaft has been restored, as have the long, long rows of mine workers' houses. Rows of houses that appear to be endless. Here, some images of the entire mining complex. And here, a tour past the objects and artifacts that figured in the mine workers' daily lives. Like the collection of simple manual tools with which the coals were extracted before pneumatic tools became available. The miners lived under the toughest circumstances. That makes it all the more admirable that there was time and energy left for making music, that there was money to buy instruments, and that they learned how to play them. Once you went to work in a mine, there was hardly ever a way back. Even the schools were part of the mine system. The endless rows of houses have been restored to their original state, and as part of the museum, some of them are open to the public. And the tower of the elevator shaft can be seen from everywhere, because if the wheel didn't turn, something had gone wrong. At the museum, one can also see what it looked like underground. Impressions of this are provided by audio-visual means and superb light shows. But no more than impressions, for the miserable reality itself can hardly be duplicated. The Maison Van Gogh is located at Vincent's last dwelling in the Borinage, in Quem. This is where he decided to become a professional artist. By means of painting and drawing, he wanted to show the outside world how hard and inhuman the mine workers' lives were. Many of his other works are also on display here, as well as all the letters he wrote to his brother Theo. From the wheat fields higher up, the river on which Auvers is built, the Oise, cannot be seen. Hidden amongst the foliage lie castles and country houses. The people who live there do look out on that slowly meandering river. Auvers on the Oise. The river that once was an important transport route from and to Paris. Auberge Ravoux back then and today. This is where Vincent van Gogh had a simple room just before his death. The current owner has completely restored the inn to its original state at the time. Visitors who come to eat or drink here get the impression that Van Gogh's drama took place only recently. More than that, the glass of absinthe is waiting for Vincent, it seems. By means of this stairwell, Vincent would clamber up to his room. It contained just a bed, a chair, and a closet. Everyone has his own way of expressing his experiences and thoughts in the guest book. Many anonymous visitors, but also many famous personalities. The tourist office in Auvers has mapped out a number of walking routes along the places where Van Gogh chose his subjects, as well as other interesting and historical sites, such as the house of Dr. Gachet, the physician and amateur painter with whom Vincent struck up a friendship. Here, the well-preserved table at which Gachet sat while Vincent painted him. Gachet's house has been turned into a museum and is open to the public. Using special lighting effects, the house has been given a distinct atmosphere. Were these really the medicines Dr. Gachet prescribed to his patients? Who can tell? From the old main street, equally old steps, more than 700 years old, lead to the church of Auvers, which became renowned all over the world because of Van Gogh's painting. This is the view of the old main street from the village square a little higher up. Young artists and art students almost daily put down their easels here, just as Vincent van Gogh used to do. The routes are easy to follow, thanks to the many signposts and the map provided by the tourist office. Auvers, of course, has many places to spend the night. Hotels, but also an historical gîte de France with modernized rooms that offer splendid views. In the Parc Van Gogh stands a statue of Vincent made by the famous Russian-French sculptor Zadkine. In Auvers, they've managed to guard and preserve the old authentic atmosphere in a very special way. The Chateau d'Auvers, also called the Chateau de Léry, after the family that once owned it, stems from the 17th century. Especially worth seeing is the cave, the walls of which are lavishly decorated with beautiful glass and shell fragments. The Chateau d'Auvers is now in the hands of the authorities of the Val d'Oise. An unusual museum in Auvers is the Absinthe Museum. Absinthe is a strong alcoholic beverage, long forbidden because it contained a toxin. It was Vincent van Gogh's favorite drink, which is why this bottle of absinthe even bears an image of him. It's a clear anise-based drink, like present-day pastis, which becomes turbid as soon as it's diluted with water. At the museum, the entire story of absinthe is shown and told. At the end of the main street stands the house of Charles d'Aubigny, a painter Vincent van Gogh admired very much. The two never met, as Vincent belonged to a younger generation. Inside the house, d'Aubigny made some impressive murals. The house is now a museum. At the time, d'Aubigny's widow opened her garden to the younger generation of painters. Vincent gladly made use of this gesture and painted the garden several times. D'Aubigny House was and remains a meeting place for artists from Auvers and its surroundings. And Auvers is administered from the Mairie or Hôtel de Ville. The administrators do so with respect for the subjects Van Gogh painted and see to it that those subjects are preserved in their original state as much as possible. This path gradually ascends to the wheat fields higher up. Many visitors follow this path, for it doesn't only lead to the beautiful panoramas up there, but also to the cemetery, where Vincent van Gogh found his final resting place. In February 1888, Vincent van Gogh traveled from Paris to the Provence in search of warmth, light and color. But it was winter, there was snow all round, and it was barren and grey. The Provence is a region with mountains, the foothills of the Alps, as well as flat lowlands close to the Mediterranean Sea, where the Rhone River has made its delta. Roughly speaking, and varied holiday destination, which still has that characteristic smell and authentic atmosphere. This is how Vincent van Gogh traveled to Arles, just as today's tourists do. Arles, in the south of the Provence. A lively city where Vincent van Gogh still plays an important role. Arles is traversed by the Grand Rhone, which flows out into the Mediterranean some 50 kilometers to the south. The Espace Van Gogh in Arles is a cultural center dedicated to Van Gogh, partly located here, at the old hospital, where Vincent was admitted several times, among other reasons because of his mental instability. Here, the luscious interior garden, which became famous because of Van Gogh's painting and is being preserved in its original state out of respect for the past. The subjects Van Gogh painted here, like the old mill, have remained clearly recognizable and can be visited by means of routes that have been especially mapped out. This is where the yellow house used to stand, where Van Gogh lived. German bombs destroyed it in 1944. Arles is still a source of inspiration for artists. It's an old city, dating from the time of Emperor Augustus. In Roman times it was called Arelate, and known as the Rome of the Gauls, and the Romans clearly left their marks. The Van Gogh monument in Arles City Park, where he painted many of his works. Even Julius Caesar still lives on in Arles. In his day, he received a lot of help from the city in his campaign against Marseille. Out of gratitude, Julius Caesar awarded Arles a special status. The beautifully restored buildings on the squares give the old center its special ambience. The many sidewalk cafes are inviting places. Especially in summertime, they offer ample opportunity to taste the Provençal atmosphere and a glass of wine. Especially worth a visit, of course, is the famous Café La Nuit, or Night Café. It is now called Café Van Gogh and has acquired worldwide fame through Van Gogh's painting. Just outside the city, a signpost points to the Pont Van Gogh. This refers to the bridge at Langlois, a striking and gracious drawbridge visited daily by tourists from all over the world. Van Gogh drew and painted at least 6 versions of it. Around the city of Arles, one finds the wheat fields, frequent sources of inspiration for Vincent, just as the colorful fields of lavender and the sunflowers. Right on the Mediterranean coast lies the beach resort Les Saintes Maries de la Mer, in days of old a busy fishing port. The name, Les Saintes Maries de la Mer, comes from a Provençal legend about Mary of Jacob, Mary Salome, and their black servant Sarah the Egyptian. About 40 years after Christ, they arrived here on the southern French coast and would later be worshipped as the 2 Saint Marys, particularly by the Gypsies. To this day, every year in May and October, gypsies from all over the world make pilgrimages here. Special devotion is lavished on the statue of Sarah, whom they consider their protectress. Les Saintes Maries is a lovely bathing resort with a wide beach offering tourists all facilities. The Camargue lies north of Les Saintes Maries. It's a unique swampy and flat nature reserve with flamingos, wild white horses, and cattle, and characteristic architecture. Not far from Arles, near Fontvey, lie the ruins of the Abbey of Montmajour, which dates back to the 10th or 11th century. In the 17th century, the abbey fell into disrepair, and only the church of Notre Dame is still intact. The ruins, which lie a little bit higher than the lowlands around Arles, command the surroundings. This is Les Baux de Provence, remains of a medieval city on top of a 280-meter-high rock with a length of 900 meters. Now a dead city, but with a turbulent and sometimes bloody past. It gave its name to bauxite, the ore from which aluminium is made. It's a much-visited tourist attraction, where a number of reputable restaurants fiercely compete with one another. During the high season traveling south, traffic jams often cause endless misery. You're better off taking your time and visiting the many places, villages and natural phenomena worth seeing along the way. That will give you a lot more satisfaction than the hecticness of the motorway. Just north of Les Baux lies Saint-Remy de Provence, famous among other things for being the birthplace of the physician and astrologer Michel de Nostredame, also known as Nostradamus, who made some remarkable predictions. Saint-Remy was also for a long time the residence of the famous French composer Charles Gounod, a contemporary of Vincent van Gogh, who still plays a leading part in the tourist attractions of Saint-Remy de Provence. This historical spot is called Les Antiques. Two Roman monuments stand here, the Triumphal Arch and the Cenotaph, a well-preserved mausoleum dating back to the 1st century after Christ. In Saint-Remy too, the past is regarded with great respect. Streets, squares and buildings have been preserved in or restored to their original state as much as possible. The Centre d'Art Présence Van Gogh is located in an historical building and houses a permanent homage to the painter. In the museum shop, reproductions of many of his drawings and paintings are for sale. The museum's primary focus is on the unhappy yet very productive period Vincent spent in Saint-Remy. The landscape, the play of the light, the sun, the flowers and the blossom, the wheat fields, the people, the colors. Those were why Vincent chose to live and work in the Provence. Anyone who wants to can follow in Vincent van Gogh's footsteps. All tourist information centers will be glad to advise and assist you.